study,
and play come together on a Windows 11 PC.
And for a limited time, college students get
The best of both worlds.
Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Hello, True Spies listeners. Welcome back to our new assignment, True Spies Debrief. Could a greater understanding of Russia's intelligence services help to counter the nation's most dangerous tactics? That's the question at the heart of Sean Wiswesser's new book, Tradecraft, Tactics, and Dirty Tricks, Russian Intelligence and Putin's Secret War. First for the State Department, and then at the CIA, Sean spent 30 years honing his expertise in Russian intelligence strategy and in the history, culture, and mentality that make Russia one of the West's greatest adversaries. This week, he sits down with True Spies producer Morgan Childs to share his insights on how the superpower operates in the shadows and why he believes it's time to bring those secrets into the light.
Well, thank you, Sean. I'm really glad you're here. Your book is kind of like a sort of pacey textbook for students of espionage, and I think it's going to be total catnip for True Spies listeners. So my first question for you is, why take on this project now after your retirement?
Yeah, thank you, Morgan, for the question. Thanks for having me on True Spies. Been an admirer of your content for years. You and your colleagues, you guys do great work. So it's an honor indeed. So the book was intended to help further the knowledge and experience of our service, CIA, on the Russian intelligence services. As I relate in the introduction of the book, the first thought of doing a book on this topic came about because I had traveled a lot around the intelligence community. I taught at almost all of our major intelligence community academies over the course of my career, particularly later in the career. I was senior expert cadre and the director of operations at CIA. And as I relate in that introduction, I was at one of these major intelligence community conferences, and one of my colleagues and I call him Dave in the book. He's very well known across the community as well. We both remarked on, geez, we're losing a lot of experience. We're losing a lot of institutional knowledge in the Russian services. And they are as well, of course, Morgan. They also have a lot of veterans of the old KGB that continued on in the SVR and FSB who are retiring. But so then that was the idea many years ago, sort of planning the idea, maybe this is expertise maybe I'd like to pass on. And then I retired from CIA, and there's an added burden, though, for us writing a book. Of course, we have to get it cleared by CIA and make sure it doesn't contain any classified. And so that was an additional part of the process. So I needed to make sure, you mentioned kind of parts of it read like a textbook. I cited it very heavily. I think academics like that, but those citations were also to show CIA, hey, there's no classified. A lot of this is out there in the open. I've just analyzed it. I've added in some lived experience and some stories that a lot of folks appreciate as well. So it was definitely a process.
I said textbook. I said pacey textbook. I think it's really engaging.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's true.
No, I'm curious. I mean, when you mentioned this loss of expertise, between the Cold War generation and the more recent one, I mean, what was the knock-on effect of that? What impact did it have?
Yeah, so what happened was it's no one's fault, really, Morgan, but the reality is for most of my career until President Putin puts himself back in the limelight by doing evil and malicious things like invading Ukraine, Russia has not been that very top of the priority list for our national security strategy. We were at war, of course. Veterans of the intelligence community and the military, like myself, we deployed into war zones, conflict zones. Our country was at war. The UK and our allies were at war with us in both Afghanistan and Iraq. So the attention of the American people and our national security apparatus was focused on legitimate other threats. And Russia was always sort of top 10. But through a lot of that, and you can read the national security strategies, it's all laid out in unclassified variations of it over the years. Russia was somewhere around 8 to 10 for a lot of my career. Only in recent years, of course, with their unparalleled aggression against Ukraine, the first largest full-scale invasion of another country since World War II, and horrible cost and suffering, Russia's put itself back at the height of our attention. But so yeah, we were busy with other things. I wouldn't use the word distracted. I would say we were engaged. CIA officers, our intelligence community, we were engaged on the global war on terror. We were engaged on China becoming the new pacing threat for our Department of War and our defense community because of their sheer size and of their military and what they're trying to do in Asia. But yeah, Russia got a pass for a while, but not anymore. Morgan, they're right back where they should be at the top of our national security priorities.
And I know that you've written for a really general audience, and I wonder what you see as sort of missing in terms of the way that this information is conveyed to the public. Do you think this is is it the way that government agencies communicate with the public or political leaders, or is it really more in the way that the media is talking about Russia's capabilities? Sort of which parts of the puzzle do you feel like are lacking here?
Yeah, I think that one of the goals of my book is that to explain, and for a general reader in a very basic fashion, what are the tradecraft tactics that Russia uses in their espionage and intelligence operations. Things like active measures, I think, that have not been well understood by the American public, nor our allies for that matter. Russia engages in what we would call covert action as a routine element of their foreign policy. In the West and in the United States, we need legal authorities. We need very, very particular authorities from our president, other constitutional and law-based systems like those of our allies. Also, we have that focus on legality and doing things the right way and making sure that we don't interfere with the fourth arm of our government, the press, for instance. Russians have no such inhibitions for their security services, Morgan. So when we talk about active measures, what the Russians also call measures of support, they're information warfare that they're using against the West. It's chapter 9 of my book, and one of the most important chapters, I feel. These are the types of things I'm trying to explain to the American public and our allies to say, hey, they're engaged in this. They've been at it a long time. They're very good at information warfare, disinformation, what they call maskirovka, or denial and deception. And so I think there's less of an awareness in that in the United States and with our allies, because we don't do those things. We don't engage in meddling in politics of other countries and their elections. And the Russians do it as a routine course of their intelligence operations.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to active measures in particular a little later on. But I suppose first, I wonder if we could take a sort of 30,000-foot view of the situation. What do you think Russia's particular strengths are, and where do they fall short compared with those of the U.S.?
So, yeah, sure. I try to, at times begrudgingly, but I do give a true and factual representation of the Russian services. There's some strengths that they have as intelligence and security services. The one I just touched on, of course, is they're not bounded by laws. They're really not. If you look at how the FSB, for instance, as the internal security service within Russia, and they also do a lot of foreign intelligence operations too, the laws are written for their benefit, Morgan. The FSB now for over 20 years has direct access to the internet service providers, all the phone companies in Russia. So one of their advantages as a security service is they live and they operate within a modern surveillance state meant to benefit those services. President Putin, of course, was director of the FSB in the 90s. He agrees with that wholeheartedly. He structured the state and the government apparatus so that no one is above the security services. The other thing that they do very well in their intelligence operations, for the most part, particularly when it concerns penetrating other governments, Morgan, is they do compartmentation very well. The Russians know how to protect their highest assets, intelligence penetrations and other penetrations of foreign governments. They've demonstrated that over the years. They know how to protect them. They keep a very small circle of those that are in the know. And I've been asked before, well, don't we do that too? Unfortunately, not. In the West, look at our government. What happens? Too many policymakers want to know. Everybody wants a piece of the action. I had a part of that operation too. The bureaucracy. Everybody wants to know. Everybody wants in the know. And so you look at a case like Robert Hansen. The Russians protected him for 20 years without fully knowing his identity. That would be really hard for us to do in the West. So a begrudging compliment. In terms of their failures, their shortcomings, I have a long list I get into in the book, of course, Morgan. The most important one is corruption. Corruption bleeds through everything that the Russian intelligence services do. Their systems are patronage networks meant to benefit the leaders and meant to benefit Putin personally. The FSB is not serving the Russian people. It's not meant to. They don't swear an oath to the Constitution, or if they do so, it's fake. It doesn't matter. They are set up for the survival of the regime, and in the person of President Putin himself. Protection of the regime, protection of Putin. That's what they're all about.
It might surprise our listeners to know this if they haven't read the book yet, but you have a real fondness for much of Russian culture and definitely for the Russian language, which you know well. And that kind of genuine interest, I tend to recognize more from some of the journalists that we've spoken to than perhaps from the intelligence experts. Do you think that kind of fondness sets you apart in the intelligence community?
I do. I'm not alone in that respect, though. I do know that veterans kind of the Cold War, I came in as the Cold War was ending. I argue in the book it continued as a secret war that Putin's waged on the West, of course. But we always had a little bit of a divide within CIA. There were those that hated and detested our Russian adversaries and everything about them. But then there were others like myself, our former Deputy Director of Operations, Mike Sulik. He wrote the foreword in the book. He mentions there he was a lover of Russian literature, studied it as well as an undergrad in his graduate studies. So we always had that kind of dichotomy. And I was always kind of in the crowd that I admire the people, the culture, their history, traditions. The Russians are great people. And I make the point in the very dedication of the book, I quote Lermontov, a 19th century Russian writer. We're not at war with the Russian people. We're in an undeclared war with their security services. Ukraine, our ally, is in a hot kinetic war with Russia and a war that Russia started. But we're not at war with the Russian people, and we have to make that distinction, or we are no better than them. So, and then of course there's familial connections. My wife is, she's Lithuanian on her mother's side. On her father's side, she's half Russian, half Ukrainian. Her Ukrainian and Russian grandparents fought World War II for 4 years at the front. They were battlefield veterans and heroes. And I got to know them very well. I lived in that region of the world for a good chunk of my career. I got to know her family well. So I could never say that I don't respect and admire the Russian people. At the same time, I reject their corrupt and their malign security services that have always been really kept the Russian people down. Morgan, I mentioned in the book, no one has ever suffered as much in their history for hundreds of years from the security services going back to the Tsar's time as the Russian people. They suffer the most from the repression. So
maybe let's get rooted in the historical context a little bit. I'd like to ask you about Chekism, which is a term that we last discussed on the debrief with the journalist Gordon Carrera. Maybe refresh our memory on what that term means, and then why it continues to be so relevant in Russia today.
Yeah, kudos to the. I listened to that episode. Gordon Carrera, I'm a big admirer of his work. I cite him in my own books. So yeah, Chekism. So anybody that really understands the services like Gordon does, or Sean Walker, who wrote an excellent book on the Russian illegals, you can't talk about their security services and their intelligence apparatus without talking about the culture of Chekism. So, of course, the Cheka, the Чрезвычайный комитет, the Extraordinary Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, has an even much longer name. This was the first security service that the revolutionaries set up, the Bolshevik revolutionaries set up. And, of course, Lenin said, can't have revolution without some terror. So from the very origins of the Soviet state, they were meant to the Cheka, and then its follow-on NKVD, and then on the military side, OGPU, GRU, all the successors. They've always been instilled with this Chekist culture of terrorizing their own people and terrorizing their adversaries. This is how you ended up with, not just during the Civil War, but then right after the Civil War, of course, millions and millions of Soviet people, Russians and other Soviet peoples, died in the purges under Stalin. Mm-hmm. So that culture, though, you'd think, Morgan, we would, like in the West, listen, Germany's become a great ally. They rejected the SS. They rejected the abhorrent culture of the security apparatus of the Nazi regime. No such thing in Russia today. There's no rejection of Stalinism and Chekism. And Chekism really, to me, it's the culture of the security services being the, quote, elite of society, which is mythology in of itself. But Putin not only believes in this, he preaches it. He makes sure that it's part of everything in Russia today. Morgan, you watch TV in Russian. I still watch a lot of Russian news and TV shows. I try to do it to keep my language up. It's all over their TV, their movies, this reverence for the Chekist culture of the security services and the elite of the services and all the great things they're doing. It's a carefully cultivated myth in order to make sure that the Russian people really believe, oh, we need Putin and we need the security apparatus, what they call the siloviki, the strongmen. Let them decide things. We don't have a right to make decisions. They're smarter than we are. They're the elite. So yeah, Chekism, you can't understand Russia today, Morgan, I believe, without understanding the security services and their repressive history and Chekism.
That's right. It's not just the culture. It's not just the mentality. It's that name, right? Putin calls himself a Chekist. He's quite proud of this. He's
proud of it. And that's something I related in the book, Morgan, I could never understand. I knew a lot of Russian intelligence officers I worked with as agents, but I also would deal with them occasionally in liaison where we'd have to deal with the Russian FSB or SVR. And they were always trying to get us to toast with them to Dzerzhinsky, for instance, 20 December of year, Dzerzhinsky Day, Chekist Day. And I'd say, absolutely not. I told one of them one time, I said, are you going to ask me to toast to Reichsführer SS Himmler next? And he was aghast. He said, how dare you bring up the Nazis? I said, how dare you? How dare you? You're bringing up murderers, people that millions of Russian people died in the purges. You know that. And you want me to drink to Dzerzhinsky? Get out of here with that nonsense. So I'd call them on it when we had official liaison. That's why they don't like me very much. Feelings are mutual. Now, in terms of the agents that we worked with, and I relate in the book that are helping us in the West, they get it. Morgan, it's like that Russian intelligence officer I relate in the book said, remember, the United States, you will always be our main enemy. You're always going to be the Glavny Protivnik, our main adversary. Don't ever think it's going to be anything different. And that's also Chekist culture. That's also the Chekist mentality that there has to be a main adversary.
This episode is brought to you by Perfect Bistro Cat Food. Hey guys, today I'm interviewing my cat about his perfect bistro food. Percy, you seem to be a big Perfect Bistro fan. Care to comment? Totally. What do you like about it? You love the high-quality ingredients? And the delicious flavors, of course. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Listen to Percy, guys. Visit perfectbistro.com to try it for your cat.
This spring, Uber Eats has you covered. Whether you're celebrating mom, dad, or your favorite grad, not all of us are great planners, and with the Uber Eats gift hub, you don't have to be. Send flowers, perfume, champagne, or just their favorite meal straight to their door. Gifts arrive in as little as 25 minutes, and you can add a personalized video message for that additional so-not-last-minute touch. So this spring, get a leg up on gift giving with Uber Eats. Last-minute gifts that land every time. Must be 21 or older to purchase alcohol. Product availability varies per region. See app for details.
So the subtitle of your book is Russia's Intelligence and Putin's Secret War. And I know that you recently speculated about what Russia could look like after Vladimir Putin in your column in the Cipher Brief. And I wonder how much of that dangerous intelligence strategy that you describe in this book belongs to Putin himself. In other words, what might we expect to change when he's finally no longer in power after so many years?
Yeah, it's a salient question. Morgan, thank you for bringing it up. I enjoy writing for the Cipher Brief. They've given me a great platform. I write a column every month called Kremlin Files. Hope some of your listeners might tune in and check that out. So for a recent column I wrote after Putin, after the war, and the reason I wrote it is because there's so much speculation. Oh, look how the United States took out Maduro in a quick raid. Oh, now Khomeini's fallen. Hey, maybe Putin's next. Dictators are dropping like flies. We should make no mistake. Putin is no Maduro. He's not a Khomeini. Russia is a security surveillance state where it's not just about Putin, unfortunately, to your question, Morgan. It's not just about him. He's built a strong circle of followers and senior leaders. Again, he calls them the siloviki, the strongmen around him. The leaders of the FSB, like Bortnikov, the head of the FSB, which again, he's a general of the Russian army, although he's never served in the Russian army a day in his life. Putin's made sure that these security services, they're the very top of the regime. And they have a chokehold on the Russian people. in every way, Morgan. So unfortunately, whenever Putin decides to step aside or his health starts to fail, I think he's turning 74 this year. He constantly shows these, this machismo of him riding, naked on the back of tigers and things to make himself look good. But eventually, when his health fails or he decides to step aside, I don't think we have anything encouraging to look forward to. It's going to be one of those Siloviki or one of their sons. Remember, Russia's a very sexist culture. I don't see a woman ever leading Russia in its current form with this security state. Unfortunately, they're also the services, and those Siloviki are also very racist. They don't tolerate ethnicities in Russia. They're very Russocentric, focused on Russians. So it's going to be one of those leaders from the inner circle or one of their sons. I mentioned in the article, like Dmitry Patrushev, who's the son of Nikolai, who used to be a head of the FSB as well. He's now a deputy prime minister. So that's one of those, I think, that's an inside line, maybe in succeeding Putin. Nothing good to look forward to, unfortunately, Morgan, not for now in Russia, not the way it's set up now.
Mm-hmm. You write about so many different tactics and intelligence gathering strategies in the book. We could really talk for ages, but I want to ask you just about a couple of them. First, you write about Russia's illegals, these citizens who go deep undercover, people like Jack Barsky, who's appeared on this show, and Anna Chapman. These illegals are considered the pride of Russia's intelligence services, you write in the book. So I'm curious, why is that? What is it about this particular strategy? Well,
so the part of the Czechist culture, I think, its very roots is the idea of the illegal and the nelegal. Morgan, we can't understand them without looking at their history too. And I mentioned other writers that I read and admire too that you've had on the show. So let's look at that. Going back 100 years, the illegals came out of the Russian revolutionaries. Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, they all lived under false passports. They had to travel in Europe. They were in exile or fled in exile. And so they were used to operating abroad under non-official, what we would call non-official cover or in false identities. And so the illegals always became a part of their culture and continued on as part of their intelligence tactics throughout the Cold War with mixed success. Some very well-known cases where they succeeded in infiltrating the West, for instance, the Kocher case, the two Czech spies, husband and wife, Karl Kocher and his wife, who actually infiltrated CIA. They're one of the only examples of the illegals, Czech illegals that were shared with the KGB that infiltrated CIA, were arrested and then swapped in an exchange. But then there were the ghost stories, the illegals you mentioned, in more modern times. And this is where I think we have the contrast, Morgan. They don't quite live up to the expectations of what were called the great illegals of the 30s and 40s, illegals like Deutsch, who recruited the Cambridge Five there in the UK. Today's illegals, they don't quite have the training and preparation that they did in the old days, and so they're getting caught flat-footed and in embarrassing situations like Anna Chapman's failures that I talk about some in the book. Mm-hmm. So I think Rudolf Abel, one of the famous illegals that I mentioned, the hollow nickel case, Abel or Richard Zorga, who was in Japan under deep cover as an illegal, gave Stalin the plans for the Nazis to invade. They must be turning over in their graves, Morgan, really, when they look at some of the failures of the modern, quote, illegals, what's going on. What's at root? It's a failure of fundamental discipline and training. That's what it is. And we can take advantage of that in the West, and we have, thankfully. But I also say, too, the Russians are committed to illegals. They're always going to keep deploying them. Putin has a personal affinity for them. He loves them. So every time we arrest a new group of illegals, and we continually are arresting them, there was another big swap in 2024, we can rest assured the Russians will double down. They'll just deploy more illegals in more waves to the West under different variations of illegal tradecraft, false passports, and otherwise.
Can you tell us a little bit about Abel? That's such an interesting story.
Yeah. So, Rudolf Abel is an interesting classic Cold War, one of the great illegals. So, Abel, his real name was Fisher. That was his true name. His family had emigrated. They left Russia during the revolution and they settled in America. And so he was raised to speak fluent, perfect American English. Like a lot of Russians after the revolution who believed in the ideal of communism, they followed the propaganda back home. Now, when I say follow propaganda, Lenin himself talked about such people. He called them useful idiots. I talk about that in the book, Polezny Durak. these were useful idiots. They believed that, oh, this is a new ideal, this communist system, let's go back home. And so Fisher, or Rudolf Abel, his parents were deep believers in communism. They moved back home. And then Fisher was trained as an illegal and was recruited in the service because of his excellent English language skills. And after World War II, he was deployed back to America under a false identity as Rudolf Abel. And he was set up in New York, and his job was going to be eventually to sort of rekindle some of the spies left over from the Manhattan Project. Remember, Morgan, the penetration, of course, of the Manhattan Project. The Russians stole our atomic bomb designs, and they had a number of spies there that had penetrated the project. So there were some that were caught and executed, like the Rosenbergs, and then there were others that were still kind of quiet on ice. So his job was going to be to reestablish contact and start running them. Well, he never really got a chance because although he got established in New York and was using good, solid tradecraft to communicate with Moscow, he eventually ended up being betrayed by another illegal who was jealous of him and was lazy. And so there's the famous case. The case is called the Hollow Nickel case because allegedly, supposedly, Fisher, aka Rudolf Abel, lost track of this hollowed out nickel that he was using to put microfiche in exchange with his Soviet handlers. He lost track of it. It ended up in the hands of a newspaper boy, who turned it in to the police. That did not crack the case, though. The FBI at the time knew that they had something. There was a spy somewhere there in New York, but they couldn't crack the case until that other illegal gave up Abel. And what I respect about him, Morgan, is, he didn't give up anything. He didn't cooperate. He remained loyal and true to the Soviet Union, and he was eventually swapped at Gleinica Bridge in Berlin. The movie Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks is focused on the swap, where he was swapped for Francis Gary Powers, the U-2 pilot. So I relate the story in the book. Hopefully your listeners will go check out the more full story. But I think it's a good example of what the illegals were. And then I talk about the Ghost Stories case, which I had the privilege to work on for a very short period in my career. That's how far they've fallen. So you have the contrast of the two. I hope it's interesting for you to read and for other listeners to check out in the book.
Yeah, it definitely is. There's no shortage of juicy stories in the book. But let's talk about active measures. One can definitely see how Russia's capabilities have changed in the digital age, how they might be ramping up now with AI. But I'm curious how Russia's approach to active measures changed back at the end of the Cold War, and how you saw that transition, or how you see that transition.
Well, yeah, like illegals, active measures are go back to and through the Cold War, very deep into Soviet Chekist traditions. The idea is to get your adversary through what they call reflexive control. Get the adversary to do your bidding for you as a state, as an institution, the Soviet Union, the KGB. Why fight with the West if we can get them to agree with us and do our bidding, do our will? So it's not a new concept. It got renewed attention in the West from the election meddling in 2016, Morgan, that our intelligence community agreed happened in the DNI report and the Senate Select Committee report. I cite all those things. Here's what's important, though. The real mission of the active measures, what they really were intending to do, their real goal, that was lost in a lot of the political arguing and infighting since. The goal of Russian active measures, not just in the United States, but also Brexit in the UK, which they also meddled in, it's to undermine fundamentally our democracies and our trust in the democratic system. That's the goal of their active measures today. And it's not just happening in the US and UK. It just happened in Hungary. There's been a lot of reporting there. There was an SVR plot uncovered that they wanted to stage, or allegedly claim there was an assassination attempt to see if that could boost Orban's following. They didn't end up doing it, and he lost the election anyway. But the point is, they're going to do that. And they saw Orban as an important ally for Russia. He made no bones about supporting Putin and agreeing with Putin. They're going to do that. They're going to intervene with active measures. They're going to try to change the opinions, change the views of populations. But it's more fundamental than just trying to help one issue or one candidate. It's about undermining our very trust in the system where a citizen can go and cast their vote and the vote matters. Because in Putin's Russia, of course, just like in the Soviet Union, the vote doesn't matter. They've already decided who the leader is going to be, and he's going to decide everything. So active measures are meant to sow discord, disunity, animosity among and between citizens of our populations, not just the United States, but all democratic countries that Russia is opposed to. And they do it very well. Morgan. They do it very well, and we can get into some of the more details if you like. I lay out a template in the book, in chapter 9 of the book, one of the most important chapters on active measures. I lay out the template, how the SVR does it, how I learned they did it from debriefing Russians themselves.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You've laid out a sort of recipe for an active measure, beginning with finding a vulnerability, right?
Yeah, sure. So there's 3 parts how the SVR does it. First, they identify an issue of importance to their foreign policy. And remember that the security services in Russia, the intelligence services, they do policy. We're very famous in the West, and United States in particular. Our intelligence community, we don't do policy. The CIA does not do policy. Okay, we just don't. We don't make policy recommendations. We just provide intelligence. The SVR does policy recommendations, okay? They do recommend to the president, and they give him briefings on, we think you should do this or that. So they identify an issue. What's the policy issue they're trying to affect? Let's say Brexit, because in the UK, they reported very professionally. Intelligence security services in the UK reported on how the Russians meddled with Brexit or tried to. So you pick Brexit. Russians want to, again, create discord, create confusion. Whatever the goal is, they're picking an issue. The second part of the template now is how are we going to affect that change? There's a number of different ways they can decide to do it that all fall under active measures. They can recruit an agent directly. They can recruit a journalist or influential podcaster. We're on a pod right now. They could try to bribe a politician too, to start spreading their doctrine and their views. So there's all different degrees, and there's also taking advantage of what I've already commented on, useful idiots. Don't shoot the messenger here for your listeners. The Russians consider academics to be easy targets. Russians consider that if they invite an academic, not just to a conference in Russia, but another conference elsewhere under some pretext or rubric, and that academic agrees with Russia, then let's do everything we can to foster that view. So what method are they going to use to get at it? In the case of Brexit, in the case of our election meddling, they use social media. And they used it back in 2016 when they had to get actual SVR officers to do the meddling online, pretending to be other personalities. Nowadays, they can use cognitive warfare, and they've amplified the message and can amplify it thousands of times over. The final step, though, to coming back to the 3 steps, Morgan, the most important thing is maskirovka. Doesn't do any good for Russia to do it if people can point directly with their finger and say, now, wait a second, Russia's meddling with our elections. Americans don't like that. Brits don't like that. So the maskirovka comes into play. I give the example, for instance, in the 2016 and 2020 meddling in the U.S. in social media, you have these myths that pop up like, oh, it was the dirty Venezuelan government that meddled in our elections with those voting machines that they rigged. That's classic maskirovka. The Russians either pick a theme and they deliver it via social media or journalists or otherwise, or they take advantage of corrupt and irresponsible journalists, politicians, whomever, that help further those views. Attorney General Barr said it very bluntly in the United States, that was expletive nonsense. Didn't happen. Venezuelan voting machines were not an issue in the U.S. election. But look at how much play it's got. Morgan, the maskirovka, it's very effective. So those are the 3 elements. Pick the issue, find a way to implement it. More and more it's via social media and cognitive warfare now, making huge impact out there, where upwards of somewhere between 20 and 40% of the content now is AI generated, they're saying, in social media. Yep. The Russians and Chinese both, by the way, are taking huge advantage of that. But then you need the maskirovka piece. That's what uniquely is to active measures. They got to hide their hand.
Well, so in the book, you write that the term active measures is one that many Americans weren't familiar with until the 2016 elections. Where are we now? Not so much with the term, but with the common understanding of how modern Russian intelligence services operate.
I think there's greater awareness. There have been, I talk about how the Russians view academics. I have great respect for academics, professionals, and organizations like RAND in the U.S. and CEPA and CSIS doing great work highlighting this. I cite many of those references in my book. So we're getting there. However, Morgan, I believe among the American public and the populaces of our major allies, there's still a lot of confusion, still a lot of misunderstandings. You know, I hear and I read on LinkedIn a lot of other postings. People will talk about, Russian active measures like sabotage and assassinations. No. Active measures are information operations, pure and simple. That is the Active Measures Directorate of the SVR, which numbers thousands of people, by the way. Thousands of officers just dedicated to this information warfare. That would be an intelligence service in and of itself in the West, by the way. That's just a single directorate in the SVR. So that's just information warfare. They do all those other things too, and we could talk about some of those if you like. Sabotage, and assassinations, also highlighted in that chapter in my book. So I think among the American public, we have a long way to go, Morgan. I'm trying to do my small part, spreading the word, reminding us we're all Americans. Whatever president is elected is my president, just like every other American's president. Let's not allow our adversaries to divide us. Let's not allow the Russians nor the Chinese, for that matter, to attack us on social media, get us fighting with one another. There's so many examples of this happening today in the United States. It's very upsetting, but we need greater awareness of what our adversaries, that they're behind a lot of it, and they're trying to they're trying to amplify this discord to a dramatic degree.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. The Four Seasons is back for season 2, starring Tina Fey, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, Marco Calvani, Carrie Kenny Silver, and Erica Henningsen. After a difficult year, your favorite group of friends continues their tradition of vacationing together, now with a baby in tow. From the Jersey Shore to upstate New York and Italy, their getaways are sure to take unexpected turns where comedy ensues. Watch The Four Seasons, now streaming only on Netflix.
United connects you to more of the world than any U.S. airline, and United for Business can get your company where you need to go. Whether you're growing a business or managing travel for thousands, they offer solutions to fit your needs. Track expenses, create reports, and manage traveler perks. Plus, employees earn Mileage Plus miles while your company saves on travel. Get started with no minimum spend or flight requirements. Visit business.united.com/podcast.
Well, not to put you on the spot to solve the world's problems, but what more can be done, to help the public more objectively understand how, for example, Russia plays a role in interfering in democratic elections and referenda?
So one of the things we need to do is in the West and among our allies, there needs to be greater information sharing about the tactics that they're using, and then greater training and awareness among our federal, local, and state officials about how it's happening and what's happening. Efforts to try to transfer that knowledge. I was just at a forum in Florida with it was called AGS. It was in Tampa. It was designed a nonprofit designed to educate some state lawmakers there and other state, local, federal officials on the tactics of our adversaries. It was very well done. I got to speak on Russian active measures and other Russian tactics there. We need more of this in the West. Morgan, it doesn't occur to us in democracies, the very idea of surveillance states, of meddling in information warfare, active measures as a concept, it's alien to us, and it should be in democracies, right? I mean, I was followed in my career by the Russians and their other services that cooperated with them. We hate surveillance. It's annoying, even to CIA officers. Bother me when people are following me around. What the hell are you following me for? That's what I would say internally. Externally, we don't like to let them know that we're onto them. We know they're following us. The point is, for Americans, it's abhorrent to us. But we have to understand it better. We have to recognize our adversaries are doing it to us. We can't have blinders on and close our eyes. So greater awareness, greater discussion of it. We need responsible politicians on all sides of these debates so that we don't just fall into their traps of using this or that piece of news, which may be emotional, but it's not true. And that's very, very hard, much easier said than done. I can just do my part sort of in the intelligence space to say, hey, here's what they're doing. Here's how they're meddling. And then I give historical examples like I do in the book. This is not a new thing. The Russians did this across the developing world for decades and decades during the Cold War in Latin America, Africa, where they were influencing and trying to meddle in elections. And they're very good at it. So yeah, it's a tough problem to fix, Morgan. I guess we can all just try to do our small part. I'm trying to do that with the awareness, and I kept my book apolitical, and I'm very proud of that. The book doesn't take a side on any political issue other than say, here's what the bad guys are doing. No,
you don't. That's true. You do tip your hat to some soft power measures that the U.S. Could take and has taken in the past. You mentioned Radio Free Europe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, actually, thank you. So I do mention at the end of the chapter on active measures. Listen, we can be proud of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. These were Cold War, great Cold War success stories. And we do it under our Constitution with free institutions. Those editors aren't under pressure from the U.S. government. By law, they have independence. That's something we should be proud of, Morgan. We shouldn't ever be cutting funding for institutions like that. I'm a huge fan. So you're right, and thank you for reminding me. At the end of my chapter on active measures, I point out, we can be proud of the independent and fair press in the West and institutions like that where, yes, there's U.S. government funding, but we don't control their editorial content. So we desperately need those voices. A lot of Russians, a lot of North Koreans try to tune in via shortwave radio, other places like Iran, and they listen to those voices from the West. My wife grew up in the Soviet Union. Voice of America had a huge influence, free and fair independent reporting. So those are things we can do and we should be doing, soft power. So thank you for that question. Very important.
You've mentioned your wife, and I wonder how does that personal connection with one of the Baltic states deepen your concern about the future of Russian aggression?
Yeah, deeply concerned for the Baltics. Stalwart allies of the United States, exemplary members of NATO, Poland as well. And they're next, potentially. Morgan, they're next potentially under attack. They are under attack now with Russian hybrid war, gray zone warfare, supposed gray zone warfare just under the threshold, quote, just under the threshold of actual war. I think it is war. I agree with the German head of their intelligence service last year who said Germany de facto is at war right now. The Russian GRU tried to kill the leader of Rheinmetall, one of their corporate leaders. So Europe is under attack. I believe Ukraine was just the first step in a reassertive, resurgent, and aggressive Russia who's hell-bent on using war as a means to achieve their policy. Just like Clausewitz's famous dictum from the 19th century, Putin believes war will work, aggression works, and it has for him so far. Really quickly, as I talk about in that last chapter of the book, I believe one of the most important on the Ukraine war, look at the development of what they call new generation warfare. The Russian idea of constantly having a second front. They did it in Georgia, and then they attacked Georgia under 2008 under the rubric, under the information warfare, Maskarovka of, we're saving the poor people of Abkhazia and Ossetia. Don't tell that to the people of Abkhazia, Ossetia, because they haven't benefited at all from Russian occupation. But so they attacked Georgia. What was the reaction in the West? Unfortunately, Morgan, we didn't do very much. Putin felt emboldened. Russia was emboldened. 2014, little green men, again, pairing information warfare with the aggression. They're little green men. They're not little green men. They're GRU Spetsnaz brigades, and we knew that in the West. We didn't do very much about it, did we? So finally, in 2022, we should not have been surprised, and we weren't surprised when Putin said, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to do it on an even larger scale. Unless we stop him in Ukraine, unless we make the deterrent real for the Russians, they'll do it again, and they'll do it in the Baltics, I believe, is the next spot where they might try to test NATO resolve. Further than drone incursions, further than information warfare or sabotage or assassinations, all of which they're doing, they might try a limited attack to see some type of territory and see what NATO does. So I don't rule it out, Morgan. I believe we have to be prepared, and I'm deeply worried about it in case of the Baltics and our allies in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I think another way maybe of looking at this question is, you've said that your mother-in-law could teach a course in the basics of spy, tradecraft, and agent handling. Obviously, Lithuania's history goes a long way to instill in people a deep understanding of the threat that Russia poses. But when you look at Eastern Europe, the Baltics today, what does that part of the world understand that you wish that your American readers understood too?
Yeah, thank you. You're a astute reader. I appreciate that quote from the book. My mother-in-law hasn't read it yet. I hope she'll get a chance. But I did mention, that was but my point in mentioning that was a generation in the Soviet Union, of that were raised in the 60s and 70s, and they were ingrained in this Chekist culture. I mentioned, this hero that Putin always talks about, Sterlitz, this GRU illegal who infiltrates the SS, famous series of novels and movies. Why is that important? It turns out that this Gleb Pavlovsky, he was a spin doctor for Putin in Putin's early years. Economist just had an article last week talking about that was a carefully cultivated myth. Putin associating himself with Sterlitz, this GRU illegal that was popular in Soviet culture. The point being that they understand this in that part of the world. In the Baltics, they were raised on this false mythology of, the KGB is the elite of society. Nothing worked in the Soviet Union, and the KGB was responsible for that. My mother-in-law and my father-in-law, they tell me nothing worked. And by the way, he worked for the Ministry of Interior. He knows it. He used to say we were on the second floor, the KGB was on the third floor in their hometown. The only difference was they were more corrupt than we were in the Soviet system. So nothing worked. Fundamentally, nothing worked, and it still doesn't work in Russia. So they understand. They also understand the repression. Millions of Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, that population was deported to Siberia. Hundreds of thousands of them didn't make it. They suffered. They were repressed. They were deported and executed in many cases. Visit the museum in downtown Vilnius, the old KGB headquarters. What a great job they did. They turned it into a memorial for all time. You walk around the building, and the granite blocks have the names of those who were executed inside that building. I took my sons to visit the memorials and graveyards and the KGB museum, and I said, don't ever forget the cost of oppression. My own wife's great-grandfather was executed by the SS. The Balts, remember, suffered on both sides of the war, from the Germans and from the Soviets. So these are important lessons that they know in Poland, they know in the Baltics. They'll never forget. Those populations will fight just like the Ukrainians are fighting. We as Americans need to be on their side, Morgan. The fight for freedom has never been more stark as it is right now in Ukraine and as it is on those front lines in Europe. So that's my message to Americans. Please, let's not forget. Let's stand by our allies.
Well, Sean, I sure hope your message reaches people, and I'm really grateful you were able to share it with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. It's a high honor indeed for me. Again, a listener and admirer of True Spies for going back a long time, many, many years. So thanks for having me on and giving me a chance to talk about these issues I feel passionate about. Hope some of your listeners will check out the book, Tradecraft Tactics and Dirty Tricks, out with Naval Institute Press. And I hope you'll enjoy it.
Thank you, as always, for listening to this week's episode of The Debrief. We hope you enjoyed that conversation between True Spies producer Morgan Childs and Sean Wiswesser. More debriefs are available exclusively to SPYSCAPE Plus subscribers. You'll also be able to access other premium series, like The Razumov Files, our ambitious retelling of Joseph Conrad's Under Western Eyes. And for true crime fans, there's The Great James Bond Car Robbery, the story of the hunt for James Bond's most notorious set of wheels. Subscribers also get new episodes of True Spies early and ad-free. Subscribe to SPYSCAPE Plus at plus.spyscape.com. Disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the subject. These stories are told from their perspective, and their authenticity should be assessed on a case-by-case basis. If you're enjoying this podcast, please click now to give it a 5-star rating or leave a review. Ratings and reviews help people discover the podcast and help us bring you more great stories. And if you have some time, why not forward the podcast to a friend?
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.